Let's get started. Welcome to tonight's show. My name is Alexa. I'm your head of online community here at Housecall Pro, and I am your host for the Home Service Evening Update. I'm joined by my co-host, Roland, co-founder of Housecall Pro, and Mel, our Senior Vice President of People. For the past 11 weeks, 12 weeks now, we've been sharing the state of the world according to the home service industry, and we focus on one main topic and guest every evening at 5. So before we introduce our guest tonight and go into our state of the world, we have to remind you of our big announcement this week is that this is our last week of live shows. That's why we lined up with these all-star guests. We're ending with Simon Sinek on Thursday, June 4th. So this is us not leaving you. We are still here more than ever. We are just moving to an on-demand version so we can continue to bring you really great content, really great guests, but also be very respectful of the world starting to open back up, and hopefully your business is starting to pick back up too. But don't you worry, we are here. So Mel, do you have a few words to say on that?
Well, I think my kids are ready for me to give the dining room table back. So I will still be joining as an occasional guest with Alexa and Roland to talk about any leadership and employment issues that you all are having. We'll continue to bring you inspiration. And this will also just better respect the time of everyone now that more options are opening up, and give us an opportunity to schedule guests, maybe on the East Coast that don't really want to show up live at 8 o'clock at night when they're busy doing dinner or tuck-ins for their families. So we hope that this will be a really long-term and lasting experience for all of us. So this was the start. And those of you who have been here every night, we probably need to do some awards. I think we can get some data and figure out who's been here every night. We've got some people, Michelle and Robin and Angela. Tom's been here every night. Bruce from Corona.
Robin. Oh yeah.
Bonnie. So we see you, and we're not leaving. We're just going to go to a format where we can better deliver for you in the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, season 1, season 2. It's just like every show that goes. So we're getting ready for season 2.
And Roland, next week. So again, we're ending it this week on Thursday. Tonight we have an amazing guest, obviously, and then we're going to have tomorrow night and Thursday. And after that, next week is the Home Service Super Summit. It's going to be the largest virtual summit for home services. We're going to try to break the world record there. So we'll share a bit more on that at the end. We've been sharing in our Facebook group, so just keep an eye for that. That's going to be an incredible 4 days of learning. So keep an eye out. Just remember, we are here for you always. We're never leaving you. So I want to move on to introduce our guest tonight, Whitney Johnson. She is one of the 50 leading business thinkers in the world as named by Thinkers 50, and an expert on helping high-growth organizations develop high-growth individuals. Tonight, she's sharing her key strategies for thriving in the face of personal disruptive change, like taking the right risks, playing to your strengths, or your distinctive strengths, and so much more. So before we get into our talk with Whitney tonight, as always, we're going to have Mel go into the state of the world. It's going to be a quick 3-minute update, anything you need to know from yesterday that might be affecting you, and then we're going to go into our conversation with Whitney. So stick around.
Great. Thank you so much. And good evening again. Thanks for joining us. So every night we have been giving you an update of the Johns Hopkins dashboard, which calculates and accumulates all the known cases of coronavirus. So that globally is at 6.3 million confirmed cases. Deaths are getting closer to the 400,000 mark. And recovered, we are getting closer to 3 million. So positive upward growth in that green number is what we're looking for. In the US, we are at 1.83 million confirmed cases. Over 106,000 Americans have perished, with almost 500,000, almost 500,000 recovered at this point. So according to a new study, about 7 in 10 Americans said they would get a coronavirus vaccine if immunizations were free and if they were available. So I know that there are lots of companies working on that as we speak, and it looks like that would be a fairly well taken advantage of program if that were to exist. Looking at the economy, which I know we've talked a lot about here, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the size of the U.S. economy will shrink by 7.9 trillion over the next decade because of the fallout from the pandemic. Just astonishing. And so this estimate comes at a time when lawmakers in Washington are facing decisions about extending emergency unemployment benefits, If they don't, experts are saying it could create a fiscal cliff that could end or even reverse an economic rebound. So you all remember the $600, and I know you've been very clearly impacted by the additional $600 per week in federal unemployment benefits, really unprecedented, and those are set to expire July 31st. So in good news for this group, particularly, Congress does appear poised to approve changes to the Paycheck Protection Program, which many of you have participated in. So that's one of the core parts, as you know, of that $2 trillion pandemic rescue package. So it did pass last Thursday in the House, and we're awaiting passage in the Senate. So what would be the changes there, if it remains unchanged from what the House passed, would be to reduce the share of that PPP money that you have to use on payroll from 75% to 60%. So as we know, the PPP was aimed to encourage companies to keep workers employed. And as you all also know, that's been difficult when you've been forced to shelter in place or not been allowed to do business. So also looking to extend the window that businesses have to use the funds from 2 months to 6 months. That could be game changing for many of you as you've struggled to get employees back to work while the $600 in extra unemployment has been out there. It's been this strange double-edged sword. We really want to take care of people. We want to take care of employees, but then we want to get them back to work because we want to use the payroll protection. And also looking at pushing back a June 30th deadline to rehire workers, extending the time to repay the loan, and letting companies that get loan forgiveness defer payroll taxes. So lots of really important details there. We won't know the final details until it does get through the Senate. So, that could be one of the things that you could look for in our coronavirus Facebook group, where we'll continue to post information that you need, even if we're not coming to you live. So also of concern is the escalating protests across the United States, and particularly related to the previous topic, that those protests could intensify a political standoff between the White House and Congress about emergency economic assistance, and sort of be, challenging to getting decisions passed through Congress if we're also looking at a number of the other things going on in our environment. So we'll keep an eye on all of that for you. And update you as needed, either here live this week or in our new format. Alexa, back to you.
Thank you, Mel, for our State of the World. We'll see Mel back here tomorrow for our news update.
Great.
And we'll see you tomorrow, Mel. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so let's get right into it. I'm so excited to welcome Whitney Johnson to our show tonight. I'm super pumped to talk to you again, Whitney. Roland and I, after we got off the phone with you yesterday, we're like, this is going to be a good one. This is going to be a good one. And it's always the best feeling when we feel that way about a guest and a topic, just because I think it's personal disruption is something I'm like, what is that? And why does that have to do with me and my business? So before we get into this, I'm going to ask Whitney to tell us a bit about her story, but to give a little bit more background on Whitney, she is one of the 50 leading business thinkers in the world, as named by Thinkers 50. She is the CEO of WLJ Advisors. And again, just an expert on helping high growth organizations develop high growth individuals. This is super important to the home service space. It is not just for tech companies, big Fortune 500 companies. It could be a company of 1 to 2 people, or even just yourself. It applies to you. Whitney is an award-winning author, a world-class keynote speaker, and frequent lecturer, executive coach, advisor. The list goes on and on. So we're so pumped to have you here with us tonight, Whitney. To start us off, can you please just tell us the story of how you got to where you are today and how you came up with personal disruption?
Absolutely. Happy to tell you about myself, and then I want to tell you a story because I feel like it's really, really appropriate for the conversation that we're having tonight. So my background, very briefly, is that I studied music in college and went to New York after I graduated, and because my husband was in school, as often happens, and we get to New York. I'm terrified to go to New York because I've never been in a really large city, and I still, in fact, remember as we drove across the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan, I was just absolutely terrified. For the first week, I wouldn't go anywhere by myself, but we needed to eat. So I eventually had to leave our 19th floor apartment and go out and get a job. Because I had been a music major, I had never set foot in a business course. I had zero connections on Wall Street. My very first job there was as a secretary to a stockbroker. Across from my desk, there was this bullpen of young stockbrokers. They're all trying to be these masters of the universe. And so they would say things to their prospective clients like, throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And at first I was very offended by that because I was a cheerleader in high school. But after hearing this over and over again, I'm like, you know what? It's time for me to throw down my pom-poms. And I would not have known to call it this then, but that was really the beginning of me disrupting myself. And that's the conversation that I am hoping that we can all have tonight, is this idea of disrupting yourself over and over and over again. And I think if you don't mind, I want to tell you a story as I'm thinking about this to really introduce the topic.
We love stories.
Okay, good. So, about 6 months ago, I had this wonderful opportunity of going to Peru. And I was speaking there. And when you go to Peru, if you go to Peru, you have to go to Machu Picchu. Super exciting. My daughter was taking a gap year. I got to take her with me. She was just graduating from high school. And so we're like, okay, let's do this. Now, as we get there, there's this city that you can look at, and you've all seen the pictures. But then we have a guide who says, we're going to go climb that mountain over there. And I'm like, okay, I exercise. I can climb this mountain. It's going to be hard, but we'll make it up. So we start going up the mountain, and 2 hours later, I'm very tired. But as we get to almost to the top of the mountain, the paths start getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And what was terrifying is that they were like 4 feet wide. There are no ropes. There are no guardrails. There are no chains. There is nothing. And so I am not afraid of heights, but in this moment, fear completely overtook me. So I decided to do the very logical thing. I decided to lower my center of gravity. I got down on my bum. I stopped looking at this scenic view. I start clinging to the side of the mountain, hoping that I'm going to be able to make it back down the mountain. Well, the fact that I'm here tonight, you all have likely surmised that we did make it down the mountain. But something very interesting happened as we came down. This person stopped our guide and they're like, so is it hard? Can you make it up the mountain? And the guide says, and I'm going to say it in Spanish, and then I'll translate to English. He said, nunca es problema, siempre es aprendizaje, which roughly translated means it's never a problem. You're always learning. But that is not how it feels right now. I think many of us in the world feel like we are clinging to the side of the mountain. The Boston Globe did a study, it did a survey, and they asked people, how are you feeling? And 25% of the respondents said they have never been more afraid in their lives. And so the question that I want to pose for us tonight is, how do we get to the point where we say it's never a problem, we're always learning? How do we get there? How do we get so that we start to feel that way? And I would assert to all of you, and again, this comes back to this idea of personal disruption, is that the only way you conquer a mountain is to conquer yourself, is to conquer who you are. And so the only way that any of us are going to manage through this disruption, through this change, through this upheaval, is for us to disrupt ourselves. And so that's what I hope we can really talk about tonight. And I'm happy to give you a definition, but I'll stop there for just a minute and see what thoughts you're having.
Yeah, so Gary Ridge, who was on, I forget, a couple weeks ago, his thing is always, every failure is a learning moment, a learning opportunity. And so I feel like a lot of these themes, for those of you that have been tuning in night over night, they keep coming back, different forms, but they all tend to kind of head in the same direction. So if this isn't a big enough hint for all of you, this is really a good time to, do some self-reflection and make sure that you understand, failure is okay. And really it's about learning. And so what you talked about is really personal disruption. Obviously there's outside events and things like that, like coronavirus, that kind of come in, that forced disruption. Right. But ultimately, once coronavirus is gone, people are going to be forced, if they want to continue to learn, to be uncomfortable. That's something that I always like to say, which is, growth and comfort don't coexist. So let's talk a little bit about your definition of personal disruption and why is it important now more than ever, even though we've been totally disrupted already.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go. First of all, Gary Ridge is the reason that I'm here. Big fan. We wrote about him in one of our books, Build an A Team, and he is truly a great leader. So just shout out to him. So personal disruption, let's start with the definition. It starts with this idea of disruptive innovation. And this is a term coined by Clayton Christensen, who is my mentor. I worked with him for several years. And he talked about it in a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And what it is at its simplest, is it's a silly little thing that takes over the world. Like the telephone did to the telegraph, like the automobile did to the horse and buggy. More recently, we've seen Netflix disrupt Blockbuster and now cable TV. We're seeing the virus, a silly little thing, seeming to take over the world. And then you've got Uber and Lyft overtaking cabs. And so that's what disruptive innovation is. It's a silly little thing that takes over the world. Well, the big aha that I had as I was working on Wall Street, and then I was working with Clayton, and we were investing in companies that were disruptive, like Netflix, thinking that was going to disrupt Blockbuster. The big aha that I had is that disruption isn't just about products. It isn't just about services. It isn't just about companies or even countries. It's about people. And a great example of a personal disruptor is Lady Gaga. If you look at her, in 2008, she goes straight to the top of the charts. And what does she do for an encore? She jumps to the bottom of a new chart. She does collaborates with Tony Bennett on a jazz album. She does a Sound of Music tribute. This is Lady Gaga singing The Hills Are Alive at the Oscars, and then she produces a country album. But her jump, it paid off. Her performance at the Super Bowl in 2018 had the largest music audience ever. The big difference, though, with personal disruption is that you are Netflix and your Blockbuster, you're Uber and your cabs. You're the silly little thing, and you take over the world because you are disrupting you. It's a cycle of learn, leap, and repeat. And so that's what we're talking about this tonight, is really this idea of how do you disrupt yourself. And what's unique about right now is that usually in the past, historically, we had to make this decision. Should I disrupt myself? Or shouldn't I disrupt myself? That is not a decision that is currently on the table. We haven't had to make the decision. We don't get to make the decision. We've just been disrupted. And the question, and it sounds like you've been addressing and answering and asking this question for the last 12 weeks, is we now have this opportunity to reset in a way that we may never have again in our lifetime. We've been disrupted. Do we use it as an opportunity to reset and disrupt ourselves?
Yeah, I feel like obviously the eternal optimist is always trying to figure out what is the good you can take out of the situation. But I believe you kind of summarized it a little bit here, is like, we don't get this opportunity every day, and it's hard to do it just on any normal daily basis to kind of disrupt it. And so this forceful reset really is going to make us take a lot of leaps. Yeah. So, Alexa, I know you've got a question leading into this next one here.
I just want to take a second and say, really soak that in, you guys. It's like Whitney said, it is something we've been talking about. We're thrown into this right now. And every time we show up here tonight, we try to leave with something new. We try to find something that we may be uncomfortable with and learn and figure out how to grow with it the next day. So personal disruption, when we talk to Whitney, we really want to show a visual to you, the S curve of learning framework. And Whitney, you can share, or I can share on my end.
Why don't you go ahead and share it on your end?
Perfect. Give me 1 second.
And as you're doing that, you just said something that I think is really important. So I'll share this while you're pulling that slide up. One of the things I want everyone who's thinking about this and kind of processing what we're talking about is you've actually already disrupted yourself a lot. So this is something I think is really important, is if you think about, high school, you think about trade school, you think about college, you think about your first job, your second job, you start at the bottom of a ladder, you climb to the top, and then you jump to the bottom of a new ladder. And so we all actually have those muscles, some of us more than others. I think, if you look at immigrants have that muscle developed because they've really disrupted themselves, but we all have that muscle. And so part of what this framework does is it gives you a way to think about it and say, okay, I already know how to disrupt myself, but how can I do it a little bit more systematically, and how can I do it more effectively?
That leads us to our first slide.
Okay,
I'm a visual learner, as I'm sure most people are in this group. So can everyone see our screen right now?
Looks good.
Perfect.
Okay.
Take
Fantastic.
it away.
All right. So I just mentioned a minute ago, we talked about this idea of personal disruption. You start at the bottom of the ladder, you climb to the top, and then you jump. You learn, leap, and repeat. Well, as we were investing in this idea of disruption, I had a second aha. So the first one, disruption is not just about products, it's about people. The second big aha that I had was at this S curve, and it was popularized by E.M. Rogers in 1962, that we were using to help us figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. So at the base of the S, growth is slow until a tipping point is reached, and you reach that knee of that curve and you enter into hypergrowth, and then at saturation, growth tapers off. So we were using that to look at investing. We are obviously have looked at this to look at what's happening with COVID, how quickly a virus will spread. But the aha that I had was that this S curve could help us understand how we learn. It could help us understand how we grow. Every time you start something new, you start a new job, you start a new company, you start a new project, you are at the bottom of that S. And so what the math tells us is that growth will feel like it's slow. It can feel like a slog. And once you know that, that helps you avoid discouragement. But then as you put in the effort, you're going to accelerate into competence. And with this comes confidence and engagement. And this is the exciting part of the curve where all your neurons are firing. And so that's why it's a sweet spot, because at the launch point of the S curve, it seemed like it took a lot of time for just a little bit to happen. And now in a little time, a lot happens. So that's the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the top of that S curve and you're like, you know what, this was a great project. This was a great role. This was a great gig, but I'm no longer learning quite as fast as I did. And I'm no longer getting the dopamine, those hits of dopamine that come when I learn. I'm starting to get a little bit bored. I was overwhelmed and now I'm a little bit underwhelmed. And so now you're experiencing this dilemma of personal disruption. Do I jump, as I said earlier, or do I not? And what we know, though, is that when you are at the top of that S curve, there is risk. That's why it's a dilemma whether you jump or not. Because if you jump, it's scary. But if you don't jump, that plateau can become a precipice. And as I said earlier, if you were trying to decide, should I jump or not? You don't have to decide. We've all just been pushed to the bottom of that new S curve.
Yeah, I feel like probably a good way to connect this back to the pros a little bit is, some of you that are still owner operators, you're progressively working up this curve, but once you master your trade, master dealing with customers and all of that, you're going to have to jump off that cliff and get back into it and hire your first employee and then teach them up that curve, a brand new learning experience. And you're probably gonna have to do this a couple times until the next jump, which is you bring in a GM. And now you don't have to be involved in the day-to-day operations. You can really start focusing on your business. So when you take a look at this, try to think of some times in your business where you felt like in the beginning you had no idea what you're doing. Maybe you just got into carpet cleaning. You had no clue about it. You took some courses. You started doing it. Now all of a sudden you're a master. I've seen a lot of people go, you know what? Now we're going to get into Persian rug cleaning. Holy moly, if I screw up this person's $50,000 Persian rug, I'm in deep doo-doo, So like you start back from the bottom, you teach yourself, and all of a sudden you become a master again. So when you think about this, it may seem a little abstract, but take a moment to think about the times when you started getting really comfortable with what you're doing, and maybe you didn't take that jump. because then you can start identifying when those moments are happening, because they will happen organically within your business, within the length of your own personal just being. But are there any tips you have in like, maybe like a decision-making framework when you're at that mastery peak and maybe you're not feeling that fulfillment, or you're not improving at as fast of a rate as you were before? Right. What are some ways to kind of induce this feeling of like, okay, now I got to jump into that next thing, into maybe, I wouldn't say risk is never totally mitigated, but how do you, for someone that maybe is afraid to do that jump, that leap, before they go back into the learn function, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Roland. So one of the things that I want you all to think about is that, so if you think about the S curve, you at the bottom of the S, what you need is support, right? You need support for yourself. And if you've got people that you've just hired who are at the bottom of that S, they need support. It can come in the form of encouragement. It can come in the form of giving them really rapid feedback so that they can course correct quickly. When you get into the sweet spot, what they need is focus, because they're really good at everything. So you're like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I can't get everything done. And so what they need you to do is to help them focus, help them learn how to delegate, and also to appreciate them, because they're not a problem child. Everything's working. And so they can go underappreciated, so they can be at risk. And then at the top of the S curve, and this goes to your question, Roland, is what you need a challenge. And so the challenge can come in different ways. Sometimes that challenge, if you're the business owner, for example, you're not going to jump to a new business necessarily. So how can you continue to challenge yourself? There are lots of different ways you can do that. You can do it by sometimes just getting a coach who's going to push you harder. You can decide to take on a new project. You can go into, maybe you're going to do larger projects or smaller projects or different kinds of projects, like you were talking about the Persian rugs earlier, of like, I'm going to try this new thing that allows you to continue to leverage what you do well and leverage all those transferable skills, but to try something new. And as you just said, when you bring on a new employee, you are effectively jumping to a new S curve. Now, to your question, when you get to the top of that S curve and you're like, I don't want to jump, here's what I want you to think about. One of the things that we know from the research is that we are all more motivated by what we lose than by what we gain. So this goes to loss aversion theory. We're more motivated by what we lose. We're actually 2.22 times more motivated by what we lose than by what we gain. What that means is that when you're at the top of an S curve, if you think to yourself, okay, well, if I try something new, this and this and this and this good thing are going to happen, that's actually not very motivating. Mm-hmm. If, however, you say to yourself, you know what, I'm at the top of this S curve, and if I don't try something new, I might get pushed off. Mm-hmm. I might get disrupted. I might get bored. I might start to underperform. I might start to dial it in, and my clients will know that I am dialing in. My customers will know that I am dialing in, and I will not have a business anymore. You can come up with whatever scenario you want. Whatever you need to get yourself to jump off that S curve is incredibly valuable. And so the next time you know that you need to do something and you can't seem to motivate yourself by talking about the good things that'll happen, start thinking about the bad things that'll happen if you stay still, because there is no such thing as standing still. And that'll give you that little push you need, that packing of the parachute you need to jump to a new S curve.
I wish we had like a little guy here with like animation with like a parachute down, and it goes like into your next S curve, because I like, even with you talking right now, the times where I've made the most changes in my life and career is when I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do this if I don't do that. It's about, there's, of course you can look at hope and opportunity, but looking at, I never really like put it into words like that. I think for me, where that comes into play is like boredom. When I get bored with a project, bored with a skill, and need challenge. And I know everyone here, the reason you're here tonight is because you want challenge and you want to learn. So I'm going to just add a little parachute guy to your slide.
So what you can think of the Mario Brothers, right? Jumping off the S.
Yeah, just go. I feel like another thing is, there's a great book out there. called the top 5 regrets of the dying. And people always regret things that they don't do than things that they actually did do. So when you're at that top of the curve, give yourself the opportunity to try these new things, because you never want to have that regret. And I feel like when I do talk to people, when I look for mentorship, it's just like, what's the worst that happened? Just try it. You can always go back. Obviously there's type 1, type 2 decisions. That's for like another episode. But I feel like just try it, because you might regret it. And sometimes that loss, aversion to just regretting things, is enough to make someone say, you know what, let's just go for it.
What Chester Elton said last week. He said, you know what, it's either going to be a good time or a good story. If you're lucky, it'll be both. So take that with you into this.
I love that. Go Chester.
That's another good one. I know. I got to remember that one, Alexa. I love that quote. Yeah. So let's talk about what are some ways that we can accelerate this personal disruption. Maybe we'll just dive into that one.
So Alexa, if you can put up the other chart that we have. So what we've come up with are 7. So in our research, we've come up with 7 accelerants. And right now you can think of them as guardrails if need be, because it is a little bit frightening right now. But in general, I'd like you to think about them as accelerants. So the very first one is this idea of taking the right kinds of risks. And there are 2 kinds of risks. There's competitive risk and you've all thought about this in your business, right? You've got competitive risk. There is a big market opportunity. You've got sort of projections to say, yes, there's a market here, but there's also a lot of competition. Then there's this thing called market risk, where you don't know if there's going to be demand for what you do, but if there is demand, there's no competition. And what we know from the theory of disruption is that your odds of success are significantly higher when you take on market versus competitive risk. Now that's from a business standpoint, but I want you to think about this as an individual. And a great example of this is Steph Curry. For any of you who follow basketball or don't follow basketball, you've probably heard of Steph Curry. And he is a great example of taking market risk. He has made a career out of taking 3-point shots. But what's interesting about that is that when he first started taking 3-point shots, no one was defending him. Do you know why they weren't defending him? Because the percentage or the probability that he was going to make those shots was so low. They're like, we don't need to bother defending that because they're not going to make the shot. So he's like, I'm going to go play where no one else is playing. I'm going to take on market risk. I'm going to perfect that shot. So instead of being at that crowded key under the basket, taking on competitive risk, he goes and plays where no one else is playing. And as we all know, he is a superstar. So that's the first accelerant for you all to think about, not only in your business, but for you as an individual. How can you take on more market versus competitive risk? And I'll state it slightly differently. How can you focus on creating rather than competing? Because amateurs compete and professionals create. So that's the first accelerant. As you are looking at thriving through this disruption, at accelerating out of this disruption that we're in, how are you going to create versus compete? And how are you going to take on market versus competitive risk? So that's the very first accelerant.
Yep. So as like a kind of a direct example, as you think about just the home services in general, obviously, if you're going to go into carpet cleaning, and maybe there's another carpet cleaner, or HVAC, another HVAC, what can you do that's different? Create an entire new thing. Make it so that people can lease the equipment from you. They don't even have to own it. Maybe that's a brand new program. Create a brand new market for, lease to own or something interesting. So take those risks and go experiment on it. Because if you're just going to go sell the same thing as everyone else, you're just at a price kind of war to the bottom. And you don't want to find yourself in that kind of space, because now you're competing.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, and the reason why people may be listening to this and being like, yeah, of course I'm going to create versus compete. The reason why we struggle, and so I want you to think about this mentally, is that while competitive risk is more risky, it is more certain. Mm-hmm. And so it feels less scary. Market risk is less risky, but it feels less certain, so it feels more scary. So just say that to yourself. I'm going to create. I'm not going to compete. I know it's going to feel more scary, but I know the numbers tell me that it's actually less risky. So I can't see the market, but I'm going to go try this, because if it's there, then I've got a big opportunity.
I like that a lot. Creating over competing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
let's talk about strengths.
Yeah. Okay. So this one is really just this idea of playing to your strengths and doubling down on them. And the reason that this one, part of you is going to say, yeah, I know, duh, that's obvious. But here's what's fascinating is we don't actually know what our strengths are. And part of the reason that we don't know what they are is that they come to us so naturally, so reflexively that we're not aware of them. We talk about blind spots, and we're blind to our weaknesses, but we're also blind to our strengths. And so one of the tips that I would suggest to you all as you're thinking about what your strengths are is I want you to start paying attention, and this is hard to do, is to pay attention to the compliments that you get that you dismiss. Because when people pay you a compliment, they're basically saying to you, they're putting up a banner and they're saying, here's something that you're good at. Mm-hmm. And then you dismiss it. Stop dismissing it. I'm talking about for you personally, and I'm talking about for your business. I'm going to give you kind of a silly example, but it would drives the point home. A couple of years ago, I was doing a workshop at a construction company, which I think is fitting given the discussion that we're having tonight. And one of the fellows raised his hand and I said, so what compliments do you get? And one of the fellows raised his hand and he said, people tell me I have nice eyes. Well, you can imagine in a group of construction workers, there were a lot of snickers, and fair enough. But then I asked the question, so if people tell you that you have nice eyes, do you make sales calls over the phone or in person? Mm-hmm. Make them in person. So this is what I want you to all think about. What compliments do you get that you dismiss? And then be aware that that is a strength that you have. And the only way that you are going to be really successful in your business if you're willing to pay attention to what you do reflexively well and to value it, to double down on it. That is what's going to allow you to move up that S curve of learning more quickly. Because when you feel strong, you're willing to play where no one else is playing. So that's number 2.
Whitney, do you have any advice on, so I think something like that is obviously a lot easier said than done, but I can, like, now that you're saying it, I'm now starting to thread together patterns when people say those things to me. Do you have like some actionable advice on how our pros can start taking stock of that so they can start figuring out those natural strengths that they may not know about?
Yeah. So the 2 things I would say is number 1 is literally every time they get a compliment to them personally or to their business, because you may actually not even know what business you're in. Mm-hmm. You may think, you know what, I'm in the wallpapering business. You may not be in the wallpapering business. Listen to the compliments. The wallpapering may be part of it, but what you're really in may be something very different. So listen to what people say to you about you. Listen to what they say about your business, about the people who work for you. Write them down. And as you analyze them, you will find a pattern. The second thing I want you to think, the second tip I would give to you is think about what exasperates you, what frustrates you. So Alana Kate said that the frustration of genius is believing if it's easy for you, it must be easy for everyone else. So how do you know when you're getting frustrated or exasperated? Whenever the words come out of your mouth, this is just common sense, or everyone knows how to do this. Those are indicators that you're frustrated, and those are indicators of your strengths, because everybody doesn't know how to do it, and it isn't common sense to everybody. And when you start to tap into those things as well, then you are leveraging your strengths. And like I said, wherever you have a lot of strengths, you can have more strengths. And it is the only way that you are going to be hyper successful is if you are willing to not only identify your strengths and deliberately use them.
That was someone wrote in the comments, I think Roland's having an aha moment. I'm having an aha moment too. Look, I'm writing all this stuff down.
Roland, tell us.
Yeah. No, I feel like oftentimes things make a lot of sense to me, and then no one gets it. And so you can either be really right or you can also be really wrong. But I feel like that's where you got to take the leap and go find out.
Yeah.
So So what I'm going to do, just so you're wondering if I'm taking it on or off, is I'm showing it here for the first part, and then I'm cutting up you.
Totally fine. Whatever. As you can tell, it's getting dark where I am. I'm in Virginia, so the lighting is changing. We're getting into the mood lighting now.
We're moving up the S curve.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Number 3 on this personal disruption framework.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the time, so I'll go through this one really quickly. So embrace constraints. And let me just tell you a quick story that I think will illustrate what we're talking about here. There was a film that was produced by Steven Spielberg, and it became a famous film, I think, because of constraints. So he's producing this film, he's out of budget, he's out of time, the mechanical shark he wants to use, it doesn't work, and so he finally decides to shoot the scenes from the shark's point of view and let the music, and we can all sing it, da-da, da-da, and our imagination do the rest. Without those constraints, it probably wouldn't have been a B movie, but with the constraints, it became a classic. And so the thing that I want you to all be thinking about right now is, was he successful in spite of his constraints or because of his constraints? As you think about moving up that S curve, you actually need something to bump up against that's going to give you the energy that you need to get the momentum that you need to climb that S curve. So as you're thinking right now of, I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough quality people to hire, I don't have enough expertise, whatever that is, I want you to think about, how is that constraint going to become a tool? You're all used to working with tools. How do I use that constraint to become a tool of creation? That's going to allow you to move up the S curve. So the constraint is not something to be dealt with, to work around. It's necessary. It's crucial to your creating whatever you're going to create as you move up the curve.
Yep. A lot of people think as this sort of like differentiation when they're thinking about their competitive advantage. It's because other people are going to face these constraints, and you found a way to jump over it, leap over it, leverage it, find some other way around it. So it's just a reframing of what that is. And I'm sure you guys are thinking about that right now, what that is, because I know there's things you guys do better. Obviously, there's ways to clean things 10 times faster, and there's tips and tricks and all kinds of stuff, but that's a constraint for other people. You're leveraging that and delivering value on it. You can charge for that. You can make money for that. So it's great.
Yeah. I love that you said that. Basically, a problem that people have, they're saying, I've got a constraint. And when you solve it, you remove the constraint. Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it.
So
entitlement.
Yeah, let's go on.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. This is the one that's hardest for me to unpack, and it's the one that I just keep on unpacking and unpacking. So, I've done podcast episodes on all 3 of these, the first 3 and number 4. And the reason that the basic idea here is, when we're entitled, we believe that we are either better than or worse than someone else. And I think that and when we do believe that, then we're in competition. We're either in competition to stay better than, or we're in competition to get better than. And when we're in competition, we're not creating. And I think that this one is really on, I think, many of our minds, and certainly on my mind right now, is because of all the racial injustice that has happened. To what extent are we seeing the people around us as people or as objects? And this is something, I think, especially for people that are white, like me, in our country, are we seeing Blacks in America as people or as objects? Are we willing to bear their burden? Are we willing to see the grief and the pain that they're having and stand alongside them? Or are we saying, not my problem, doesn't apply to me? No, we don't know what to do. We don't, because we'll never be in that situation. But what we do know is that the research has shown over and over again is that when people are in pain, the only way for them to move through that trauma is to have someone to bear witness to their loss. And so when we battle our sense of entitlement, we see other people as people, not objects, whether the people who work for us, whether they're our customers or clients. We don't see them as better than. We don't see them as worse than. We see them as people who care deeply about their life and the people that they love. And this is really the saboteur of climbing that S-curve. But when we're willing to see everyone as a person, we stop competing, we start creating, and we start asking questions like, what can I do to be better? So this is an important one. It's one that I wrestle with daily, and I hope all of you will as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like what's important to learn from this as well is like, growing up, is my mom would always tell me like, why don't you walk in their shoes? This has a great deal to do with empathy and having great empathy for your customers, empathy for your employees, empathy for everyone around you. It really lets you at least try your best to look through their lenses, so you can put yourself in their shoes and help battle this entitlement. Because without doing that, you're going to find yourself at an impasse and be very hard to go to that next level.
Yeah, and the best businesses do have that sense of empathy, right? They're
right.
able to know what problems are my customers trying to solve, and they find a way to solve them. So bringing it back to the business aspect of it. So I'll go through the last three really quickly. Number 5 is step back to grow. So you think about, you bring a fist back to punch, you crouch before you jump. We've all been pushed back right now. So we've kind of, been moving up along our S curve, sort of over one, up one, over one, up one on the graph paper of our life as you look at this graph paper. And we've all been pushed down that y-axis of success. And now we have an opportunity to move over one, up 3. Again, this massive reset. The thing that I would take away from this one is right now we have this opportunity to reflect, to consider, to wonder what we can do to do differently. And so I would really encourage us to do this of what's happening in the world right now, but also on a daily basis. At the end of the day, ask yourself, okay, what worked? What didn't? What am I going to do better tomorrow? Take a step back to reflect in order to slingshot forward. Number 6, I'll do number 6 and 7 really quickly. Unless you want to say something, Roland, do you want to comment on that one? No? Okay, keep going. Mm-hmm. Okay, so give failure its due. This is the idea of reframing failure, and you talked about this at the very beginning with Gary, is this notion that we're all going to fail. I've bombed speeches in front of hundreds of people. I've been fired. I've backed businesses that have blown up. The challenge isn't all those things. The challenge is the fact that I have at times attached shame to those. And so I've made that a referendum on me, on my sense of self, on my self-worth. And so when you think about it, you realize that we all fail all the time, every day. And most of those failures aren't a big deal. Oh, made a mistake. Let's just keep going. It's when we attach that shame to it. And so what I would say on this one is the more work that we can do of detaching shame from what we do, shame from our identity, and obviously Brene Brown has done groundbreaking work on this, the more quickly we're going to be able to have that return on our failure, what I call a ROF, and move up the S-curve more quickly. And then the last one is just this idea of being driven by discovery. Korn Ferry did a study to come up with the leading predictors of success. And they said that technical skills are important. You need to have those technical skills. You do have those technical skills. But the real indicator of success was the ability to take a step forward, to gather feedback, and adapt. And we certainly need that right now, is that ability. And this is where that reflection comes in. You take a day forward, you do some things work, some things don't. You learn from them, you adapt, and then you move forward. And those are the 7 accelerants that will allow you to do what you're already doing intuitively, is jumping to these new S-curves, but to do it more quickly, to do it more systematically, to do more effectively. And if you think about a wheel, the faster that wheel can go, the faster you can learn, leap, and repeat, the better you get. And so back to the initial idea is the only way to conquer a mountain is to conquer yourself and to disrupt yourself.
I feel like you tie that back together so well. Like you must have practiced this just a couple times. Full circle.
I want to share that one more time, and we're going to share with you how to download these slides, but just so you see here, Whitney, these 7 steps, it's chronological or numerical, right? Like you start with 1 and you end with 12.
It's both. Certainly there's a sequence. I've kind of walked you through that sequence of like, you play where no one else is playing. When you feel strong, you start to move into the sweet spot. You're going to have constraints. You embrace them. You're really going fast. You start to get entitled. You think you deserve it. You have to take a step back to ponder, to reflect. You're going to fail, and it's going to be harder when you're at the top of that curve because you're sort of a master. And then you have to be discovery driven and jump to the bottom of a new S curve. But as you can imagine, it's important to be discovery driven at the bottom of the S curve as well. It's important to not be entitled at the bottom of the S curve as well, to say, oh, it shouldn't be so hard. Well, yeah, it should be hard. And so you can take them in sequence, but they also stand on their own as well.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's really clarifying.
I feel like for a lot of our pros too, the willing to fail and that shame component, it's really important as you start growing your team, that you are very public about your failures. And oftentimes, at our company, we do what's called a good, bad, and ugly. And they're skewed in the bad and ugly because it allows you to do this retrospectively, which really gets you to open up and share with everybody how they're feeling, how you're feeling about it, be very public about that failure. And then inevitably it's okay. And this way other people will feel like they can take those same risks, because without it, you won't be able to scale at the same rate. If it's just you going down the one path by yourself, you're not going to go very far. You might go fast, but you're not going to go very far. You need your entire team to go very far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So I feel like we got some QA.
We have a couple really good ones.
Oh, good. Okay, fun.
Yeah. And then we'll share with you how to find Whitney online, where you can get a copy of those 2 slides, and also be subscribed to her bi-weekly newsletter, correct? It's every other?
It's weekly. It's weekly.
A weekly newsletter, which I think I signed up for last week. So, Roland, do you want to start with Michelle's question?
Yep, let's go with Michelle. I've lived my life constantly taking risks. I've embraced and have generally enjoyed the disruption of my life. I've learned a ton on the path. However, I've also learned the hard way that not everything makes you stronger. Sometimes it just kicks you behind. It takes a while to recover from. I feel like sometimes the best advice is pace yourself. What about burnout from constant disruption? I sound like a broken record of the panelist with the burnout issue.
I think it's such a great question. It's something, is it Michelle? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
It's something I've actually been thinking a lot about recently, in part because I made this goal last year that I was going to be able to run a 5K. And so I've been, gradually building up to it. And I finally got to the point where I can do 3.2 miles. But just let it be said, I don't run 3.2 miles nonstop. I run and then I walk, and I run and then I walk. One of the things that I have noticed over the last couple of months is I usually travel a lot for my work. I travel to visit my clients, and I've been at home for 3 months, and it has been wonderful. And because I'm not traveling, with travel, you have this natural run, and then you walk, and then you run, and then you walk. And now I don't have that run and walk built into my life, and I've had to figure out how to do that. And so I think one of the things that I would encourage you to think about, and I've thought a lot about, is how do I pace myself? One of the things I do, and I didn't put up this slide, but I basically on Sundays, I go to church on Sundays, and I unplug on Sundays. So whether you go to church, I would have one day, there's a thing called the Tech Shabbat. Tiffany Schlein, we had her on our podcast, where she just unplugs for one day a week. And I think that is one crucial, scientifically proven method for helping you avoid burnout, is to just unplug one day a week. I think it also makes a difference by what we do in terms of the news that we consume. That can cause burnout as well. It's caused by not getting enough sleep. But I think that what I would say to you is, you have to start looking at how are you going to pace yourself. I'm going to right now, I just worked for, an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go walk for 10 minutes. I'm going to go sit outside on my porch and I'm going to read a book for fun for 10 minutes, whatever that is. But I think it's really that run, walk. If you can have in your mind this notion of interval training, I'm running a marathon, that will, I have found to be true for me. That is helping me avoid burnout. And I think, the science says it will help all of us avoid burnout.
Yeah, obviously you can find these sine waves everywhere in nature. And there's a reason why power is transferred in that way, because in order to keep that consistency, you have your ups and your downs. So you got to step back, step forward, step back, step forward.
Yeah.
I love that
All right.
analogy. I try to do screenless Sundays. It doesn't end up that well, but I'm definitely going to challenge myself to do it now. Also, the thing is like not looking at your phone at least an hour, 2 hours before bed. I know it's really hard, especially if you own a business, because you feel like you need to be tied to it, but I'm sure it'll have some really
I have a tip, Alexa. I have a tip. So if you're not going to do screenless, I understand that because I like to do family history on Sundays. But what you can do is you can use Boomerang that pauses your email. And you can put your texts on hold, because that's a big part of it, is that you're trying to like relax and do something fun, and then you get this email or text. So don't worry so much about not doing screens. Just put your email and your texts on pause. And I basically, at Saturday around 9 or 10 p.m., I pause my email, I pause my text, and I don't turn them back on until Monday morning.
Wow.
Okay.
Is that
I'm telling you, initially it's going to be really hard. You're going to be like an addict wanting to check your phone, but it will make, I promise you, it will make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
All right. I got to go install that plugin in my Gmail.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
Definitely seen it.
Roland,
that's a great tip.
Will you post a link to that? We have a really great like story advice question from Corey Kiefer. And before I get into this, like Michelle, Corey, and all of our other pros, we really appreciate you sharing your personal stories and your struggles, because it helps guests like Whitney really be able to like tailor her answer to you and then to the genre. And your question and your struggle is probably something a lot of other people feel like. Michelle, I feel burnout too. And so Whitney's answer is super helpful to me. So thank you for sharing your stories. It helps us so much get deeper on these topics. So let's see. This is kind of a two-part thing. I'm on Facebook. So this is from Corey, who also said amazing aha moments earlier.
Good. We like ahas.
We do. So Corey says, I went from myself to 8 employees in the last month, 3 commercial accounts for lawn care and landscaping, and I had to drop one of the commercial accounts. I'm unsure of how to shake that failure. And then he gave me a bit of background here. Small backstory. After weeks of losing money on an account that should have been done in 4 hours, it was taking 9. I couldn't figure out how or why. So I think the question from Corey is, how do I shake what I perceive to be a failure and come back from that?
Okay. It's a great question. Okay, so I think the first thing I would say, unless you're highly, highly unusual, there is going to be some piece of you that it feels like your identity. We, throughout our lives, from the time you were very young, it's, oh, you're so smart, oh, you're so strong. And so every time we do well at something, that kind of goes to our identity. And so the minute we don't do something well, our identity feels under attack. So just be aware of that. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is that when something doesn't work, you need to allow yourself to be sad. See, you're going to make me cry. You have to allow yourself to be sad, because it's that energy, that caring that something was going to work, that you need, because that's the thing that once you're sad, you then are going to be able to propel yourself forward. So allow yourself a moment to just say, you know what? This was awful. This was awful. And by the way, there's a lot of grief right now. There's a wonderful article in HBR that you guys need to share if you haven't already. That thing that you're feeling is grief. It's by Scott Baronato. So allow yourself to be sad. There's a heightened sense of grief right now. That's the second thing. The third thing that I do, well, not always, but getting better at that. The third thing that I do is when something doesn't work, I almost try to sort of pull it out and be like, let's look at this thing that didn't work on the table and sort of detach it from the human beings involved and say there was something in the system that made this not work. And so let's figure out systemically what didn't work well. And that is really good, not only for you personally, but it's also really good for the people who work for you, because then you're not like, why did you do that? Almost always something went wrong because systemically you did not have things in place that you needed to have. And so if you can analyze it from that standpoint, it takes the shame away because you're focusing on the system. So again, focus on the system, pull yourself back, allow yourself to grieve, go look up that article by Scott Baronato, and then also recognize that there's an identity piece that's attached to it, and it's work that most of us need to do. There's a few people in the world that don't struggle with that, but 99.9% of us do. And so just keep fighting the good fight.
Yep. And I posted the link, by the way, to that article here to everyone that wants to read it.
You found it. Good. It's so good. It's really good.
In Facebook, Roland?
Yes. I'll try to figure out how to get it in there too.
So we have time for one more question. It's a really good question, especially for a guest like Whitney. So, and then we'll get into where you can find Whitney online, where you can follow her, and how to participate in our book giveaway. So our last question of the night is from Mel, who joined us earlier. One of my favorites. What are your favorite books on any subject?
Okay. So that is really hard because I love books so much. So, okay, one book that's been really super influential, obviously, is The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. Another book that I've been reading, see, I'm near my bookcase. Okay, another favorite book is Scripture, the Book of Mormon. Another favorite book is this book by Tara Swart called The Source. This is so fun that I'm like right by my bookshelf. And now for the what's the word?
Coup de grace.
Coup de grace, thank you.
I love how excited you just got, Winnie.
I am a huge fantasy fan. Brandon Sanderson, The Way of Kings. He's amazing if you like fiction and fantasy. So there you go.
I love that we covered all the different categories.
I know.
You got
something for everybody.
I know, exactly. Business.
Fantasy book this big.
Yeah, exactly. It's like 1,000 pages. Anyway, so those are my books.
Awesome. Thank you. I posted, I typed out as fast as I could, and then I posted a link to the first one for you guys in there.
Yeah. Innovator's Dilemma, The Source, Book of Mormon, and Brandon Sanderson, The Way of Kings.
So I think now you've set yourself up for the perfect question that I'd love to ask all the guests. Would you be able to introduce us to Clay Christensen of Innovator's Dilemma to see if we can get him on the show here to help our pros out? Do you think we could make that happen somehow? How do you think we can get a hold of him?
I wish I could, but he passed away a couple months ago.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Wow, that's so sad.
Do you know why you don't know that? So he was very young. He was only 67. And the reason you don't know that it happened is that he passed away, and then a couple of days later, Kobe Bryant passed away.
Wow. So obviously that made a lot of news, and
it just got eclipsed. It just, people who were in that small little world knew it, but it just, as soon as Kobe Bryant passed away, it just sort of, no one knew anymore.
Oh, 2020. Oh my God.
Yeah. 2020. That's one of my favorite books as well. So I was like, oh man, I gotta make that.
I know. It's just, he's an amazing man. And I wish that we could, but alas, you can read his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and How Will You Measure Your Life? But oh well.
Yep. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So, let's get, here, let me post a link. Whitney, where can our pros find you online and subscribe to your newsletter?
Yeah, so Alexa, I think the best way is that you could do a quick download. It's called, if you go to whitneyjohnson.com/calm, CALM, we have a download that basically walks through all 7 of these accelerants that we talked about, includes TED Talks that you can watch, podcast episodes that you can listen to, that will just walk you through everything we talked about tonight. Yep, there you go. You got it.
Yeah, I had it all already. I've already subscribed. Everyone here should do that too. And
all right. What's the next thing here? Because we got a book giveaway, and I think this is super exciting. We love to do this for our loyal listeners. So here's the challenge. And there's a couple different questions that I want you to answer, but I want you to text my cell phone. It's 858-215-1512. We'll post it in here. But the question that I want you to answer here is, what is a constraint you have that you can turn into a positive? Or what's a strength that you have that your competitors don't have?
Great question.
And so you can answer any of these questions here. And the third one, which is, how are you going to disrupt yourself tomorrow or the next day?
The next day. I'll post the questions there. And the reason we have 3, because the 3 of us thought about this last week, we're like, we can post 1 question or multiple. Think of it as like an exercise. We'll probably turn this into like a worksheet for you guys to be downloaded. I posted it there. Roland, can you post your number?
Yep.
And so for you guys who are loyal listeners to us, you know we love doing these book giveaways, especially when we have incredible authors and educators like Whitney. So I'm going to post a link to Whitney's newest book. So it's Disrupt Yourself, Master Relentless Change, and Speed Up Your Learning Curve. So it just dives way deeper than into what we talked about today. I'm posting it here. Oops, that's a really long link. Hold on. Let me just go to your website.
Yeah, it added all that metadata.
Oh.
There we go. That's the book that we're going to be doing on the book giveaway. You have to answer the questions. If you don't do it, there's no book. But if you do, we're going to go find a local bookstore, ship it over to you, so that way you can read it to really go study up. And then hopefully you can share your success story with me afterwards. And you've got myself one to do so. So let me know. And then I'll share it with Whitney. I'm going to share all the answers with Whitney. So that way she can see exactly what people are saying here. And then obviously too, people that are going to watch this on the replay, which is really where we get the distribution, we'll get even some more there. So if you're watching this later on, you're totally good. You've got about a week or so, actually before season 2, I guess, to send that over to me. So send it over to me, and then we will buy the book and send it over to you.
Yep. Whitney, thank you so much for joining Roland and I tonight, for joining our pros. This was super, not only educational, but really inspirational. And that is exactly where we'd like to be on our curve. So thank you so much. We're going to come out with a blog post tomorrow. We'll have the link to Whitney's website, the whitneyjohnson.com/com, in case you guys missed it, with just a summary of what we talked about tonight, if you want to go back and look at it, or if you are not watching this yet until later. So thanks
again, Whitney. That was amazing.
Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you, pros.
Good night.
Have a good night.